Several of us in our rice processing program at the university, including Dr. Batista, who's here, Red Burgos, I know, is here, and Dr. Counts from the station here, have been looking for several years at explaining the reasons for milling quality reduction. And so there's a lot of issues that face this. We get a clicker to working. We know that we can reduce milling quality at various stages of the rice production chain. Certainly in drying, storage, even in the milling operation, you can reduce head rice yield. But what I want to focus on today are those issues that in the pre-harvest arena, those factors out in the field that could be causing head rice yield reduction. So what I want to show you first of all is a classic curve that we have generated over time. We've generated hundreds of these curves. And what we see over and over is that you'll generally have a parabolic or quadratic relationship that relates the head rice that you will see for a given harvest moisture content. So what Rusty and Red have done over the years is to look at many different cultivars and hybrids, but also many different locations under different years. And so we see this parabolic relationship occurring. Now, not all cultivars and even the same cultivar in the same year will follow this kind of behavior. Many times you'll see a much flatter kind of relationship, but it can be more severe than this as well. So what I want to talk about is various aspects of this curve. Why does the head rice yield reduce at high moisture contents, low moisture contents, and then we're going to focus on this peak as well, and that's kind of the new information that I want to deliver to you. But first of all, why do the head rice yields decrease at higher moisture contents? If you look at samples at higher and higher moisture contents, generally you'll see a greater percentage of immature green kernels. And if you separate those kernels and mill them separately, generally we see that at least half of those kernels will break in the milling operation. That of course will reduce your overall head rice yield. But at the lower side, this is something that we've worked on for many years, and we know that these fissures, as shown here, are the result of moisture adsorption, rapid moisture adsorption by dried kernels. As a matter of fact, if you plot the percentage of fissured kernels in samples, as the harvest moisture content decreases, the number of fissured kernels increases exponentially. Certainly, the reason for this scatter here is weather conditions. You can have low moisture content samples that mill very well if you haven't experienced rains. But if you do see a rain during a case where you have low moisture content samples, you could see fissured kernels up in this range. So you can really reduce head rice yield that way as well. But what I want to focus on today is something that's kind of been a little elusive to us. And that is why does this peak in some cases, even in certain years, why does it not get up to this theoretical maximum of 70%? And the reason I say 70% is in a milling analysis, of course, when we have rough rice starting out, approximately 20% of the weight is going to be hulls. Another 10% or so is going to be in the bran layer itself. So that gets you down about to 70%. If you have no broken kernels, your head rice yield could be up at this 70% level. But many times we see it at a much lower level, more like around the 60 to 62%. And it varies within a year, across years, and even by cultivars. What we've done in working very closely with Dr. Counts in the last several years is formulate a hypothesis based on some of his physiology work. And here's the hypothesis, is that if a kernel during its kernel filling period, which we consider the R6 and R7 stages of reproductive growth, if during those stages we see or experience high nighttime air temperatures or elevated temperatures, we think that there's a disruption in the process of turning glucose into starch, and we see a disruption in the process of packing the starch, and that's going to form a weaker kernel. Okay, and that's going to, those kernels are often going to break during the milling process. So just to show you some of the evidence for why we think this is true, let me take you through this series of studies, if you will. You'll recognize Dr. Counts' staging system. Again, where we're really concentrating here is the kernel formation stage, the R6 and even into the R7 stage. We did a piece of work down at Rice Tech. We'd be glad to show you that. Because of time, I'm going to jump to the field studies that we did in the last several years. Here is the way we did it. We worked with the breeders with the Arkansas Rice Performance Trials. If you're familiar with that program, you know there are 6 locations throughout Arkansas from south to north. And what we did is to plant 6 cultivars specifically for our sampling at those locations. So at those locations, Rusty and Red would always monitor the temperature from the booting stage all the way through to the time of final harvest. So we know what the temperatures were in that particular field for those particular varieties. So what we first of all did was to harvest it multiple times at each of those locations for each of the cultivars to get these head rice yield versus harvest moisture content curves, and we picked the peak head rice yields that occurred at each of those locations for each cultivar. Now, here's something a little different that we've done in an analysis that one of the co-authors, Dr. Salih, looked at. We plotted the temperatures during the days of each growth stage. But in particular, we looked at the R6 stage, and we started to look at the nighttime air temperatures. And what we did is we identified the nighttime as starting at 8 p.m. and going to 6 a.m. So what we did was to look at those temperatures during those nights, and then we plotted a frequency distribution. So what we wanted to look at was how many times was that 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 71, 72, etc. So for this particular case, this was the frequency distribution that we saw. But then, how do you quantify this? How are you going to mathematically basically represent this distribution? So we did a quantile analysis where we said, well, we're going to take the temperature below which 99% of the temperatures fall. We're going to call that our quantile temperature. So in this case, it was 79 degrees. If the distribution is at a higher situation, maybe we had a heat wave or whatever come through, you're going to have a higher quantile temperature. Cooler temperatures would give lower. So now what I want to do is just show you some of the data that we got from this. I want to show you the peak head rice yields. Again, where that relationship peaked, the best that we saw for that particular cultivar in that particular field. And I want to basically plot that against the 99% quantile temperature. Again, the higher the temperature, the more nighttime air temperature units that we had. First of all, let's look at LeGroux, a variety that we know is susceptible to head rice yield reductions. You can see very clearly the higher the quantile temperature, head rice yield fell off very, very rapidly, even down into this range where we were seeing peak head rice yields of around 50%. But Cypress is known for being a very, very excellent stable milling quality variety. If you look here, yes, it decreased some, but not a great deal. So even Cypress was susceptible to this, but not near to the extent of LeGroux. Here's Wells, same kind of relationship. XL723, a hybrid, was actually fairly stable all the way across. And we've seen that with 723. It was a little lower here, but it really didn't react the same way. The other thing that we noticed is that the chalkiness levels, I assume everyone knows what chalkiness is. It's definitely a quality detriment to have chalk in your rice. What we saw at the same time as the head rice yield is the chalkiness versus the nighttime air temperature. Look how it increased as our nighttime air temperatures increased as well. So we think the relationship between chalk and head rice yield is definitely true. Let me go to the significance of this. We think we've gone through 2 years of this particular study. In the ARPT, we have a 3rd year being started, or the harvest will start just in a couple of weeks. So we'll have a 3rd year of this study to hopefully validate what we've seen so far. But the new information that we have is that the peak head rice yield, we think, is definitely tied to nighttime air temperatures. The hope that we have is that because there's varietal differences here, there's something about cypress from a genetic standpoint that can be perhaps incorporated into some of the new cultivars and new hybrids that hopefully help reduce the susceptibility to nighttime air temperatures.